sort of particle scenes in yours. It's all animation. You got your close-up of the muscle fibers and things like that, but I don't think...
Unless I put them, like the calcium and stuff, in the scene with the
That's true. That's true, yeah. So if you wanted to populate a scene with lots of factors that are moving around, you don't want to control them. You have to look at ways to make them collide with the existing things in the environment and stuff like that. Now, there are particle solutions in After Effects, too, that you can use, and they're actually quite good, and you can get 3D effects with particle systems there, too. And a lot of time you don't even need 3D effects. But we're just going to talk about particles in Maya today. So this is the kind of thing where you don't have to model or do anything. So if you want to follow along and just play around with this stuff, that's fine. I would encourage you to do that while I do this. The thing I'll say with when you try and figure out a dynamic system, just like when you're trying to figure out a shader, if you're testing it and you want to see what happens, just change one thing and then run the simulation. Don't change 10 things and run the simulation. You'll never know why it's happening, why these things are working. So if we just go into the menu system here, you'll see there are a whole bunch of things down here with N attached to them. So these are the nucleus nodes. So Maya's latest iteration of its dynamic system is based on the nucleus node in the nucleus system. So I'm just going to create an nParticle system here. Now you'll notice, I'll just tear this off so we can see for a second. Down here there is a thing called legacy particles. So Maya used to have just a particle system, which really wasn't nearly as robust as the new nParticle system. One of the reasons the nParticle system is much better than the old particle system is that in the past, particles could do stuff. They could move around in fields, yada, yada, yada. They couldn't collide with each other, and they couldn't interact with other dynamic systems. So you could have hair moving around doing something. You could have particles, but they had nothing to do with each other, which is frustrating. What the N system, the nucleus system, allows is to have all the different types of particle systems, nParticles, Ncloth, nHair, and fluids interact with each other now. So you can have a much more complex set of conditions. So there may be some reasons to use these legacy particles. There's an old function called curve flow for doing blood flow that's very easy, but a little non-intuitive the way it works. I'm going to show you a different way to use the nParticle system to do blood flow today. And this is something we've been teaching in class, but it's actually something that was refined and really documented by Corinne Ho. She was a graduate of the program a couple of years ago, and she made a video tutorial. I used to get students to do video tutorials on a technique that they worked out. I think I did that in the first class. But anyway, so she did that, and you can search on her Vimeo channel for that if you need background. But it's a great tutorial. Okay, so the best way to create particles is simply to create an emitter. There are lots of things you can do. You can fill an object with particles. You can use the nParticle tool to draw particles in the scene. But most of the time, you're going to create an emitter to create particles in the scene. So I'll just do the simplest thing. I'll just create an omni emitter. So an omni emitter is just something, a point in space that particles come out of. So I'll give these some speed. So if we just look here, there are lots of different settings. So you've got your particles per second. So we can just leave these things at the default. I turned the speed to 1 because I think if I reset my settings, yeah, by default it's 1. So that's the speed they're moving away from the emitter. And the rate particles per second by default is 100. I'm just going to reduce this so it's not so taxing on the system. And all this other stuff we can just forget about for now. Oh, my hand is on the mouse pad. So now, if we look in the scene, I'm going to open my outliner so we can take a look at the different things here. The other thing we'll probably want to do is add some space to work in. So mine's set at 120 frames. I'll give it, 1,500 frames so we can play through the simulation. And also, because this is a dynamic system, it has to be on play every frame, because Maya has to track the position of each particle on every frame. It's not trying to play in real time. So if we open up the preferences here in Maya, the time slider preference, let's change it to play every frame. I'm going to go to 30 frames per second. The 30 frames per second doesn't really matter here, but all the stuff we're doing winds up being 30 frames per second. So you'll notice that I scrubbed my timeline, and there's a warning down there. It says the nucleus evaluation is skipped because I tried to scrub in the timeline. And it's trying to evaluate the position of these particles every frame, and if you do that, you'll get this. It's not an error, but a warning. So if I just play now, we just have particles being born. So what's controlling this here? So the first thing you'll notice is that they're falling, right? They're reacting to something in the environment. So the environment's defined by this thing called the nucleus node here. So if we open that up, and the reason this nucleus node is important is if I have multiple particle systems, or a particle system and hair systems and a cloth system, we have to make sure they're existing under the same nucleus node for them to interact with each other. There may be situations where you don't want them to interact, and you can have multiple nucleus nodes within a scene, and that would be just fine. But if you do want them to interact, they have to exist within the same environment. So here's the nucleus node here. I'll just tear this off so we can look at it. And, you know, it's got transform and stuff, but this doesn't matter. But we've got gravity and wind. So by default, we've got Earth gravity, so -1 in the y-axis at 9.8 meters cubed. Per second squared. Yeah. And then we've got air density, wind speed, wind direction, noise, and things like that. So the air density is going to influence things like if there's lift. So this can simulate lift. If you built something like a helicopter with Ncloth blades, it could act as a helicopter. There would be lift, and it would be influenced by things like the air density. And there's no wind by default. Now there's this thing called use plane, which actually is kind of useful. If I just grab my emitter and move it up off the origin of the world, and if I play back now, it just falls down. If I turn on my grid, you can see where the floor sort of is. If I turn on use plane, it will act like we'll imagine there's a floor there. So we'll see collisions. So here's the first thing that these particles can do that old particles couldn't do. They can hit each other. They can bounce off of each other and have collisions, which is great. It solves a lot of problems that were very difficult in the past. So just turn off use plane because we don't need that. Now there are other things here in the nucleus node that we're not going to spend too much time on right now, but there are things called solver attributes. So the nucleus node is a solver. And what it does is it calculates everything to do with these particles. So the fields that are acting on them, the position of the particles, the quality of the particles, their dynamic properties. And it evaluates where they should be at every frame depending on the dynamics that are happening. And so these things, solver attributes, these are substeps, collision iterations, and things like that. This is how many times per frame it checks. So the more times it will check, the more accurate your solving will be. So you won't get accidental penetration of a particle going through a collision object because it didn't check in time for it to notice that it had passed through. But it also increases the time that it takes to evaluate. The other important thing here is this scale attribute. So there's a space scale here, and this you would use if you model, let's say you model a cloth, and you want it to act like a Kleenex. And so it's falling at a certain speed, but it acts in a very different way. It's acting like a sail on a boat. So in Maya's world here, we're working in meter units. So if you model something that looks small, it could actually be evaluating as very big, and it will act differently. And so you can use the space scale just to change all the settings. So if it was something 10 times bigger, you could change it to the space scale of 0.1, or vice versa, so it acts properly. For us, it doesn't matter that much because we're mostly simulating these, not make-believe worlds, but worlds that aren't acting in ways that we experience physically. So, but just be aware that that's there. Anyway, so a lot of the time, if you don't want gravity to act on your particles, you can just turn it off here, and so you won't have them falling. So now if I play, but this is a global setting, so this will occur to all particles in the scene, and hair and everything else. And now you can see they just float out. You can see they slow too. So there must be other properties acting on here. There is air density for one thing, so it's going to slow the movement of the particles. But more importantly, we have to look at the particles themselves. So let me just tear off this tab. So there are a lot of settings here, and we'll just go through a couple of the basic ones, and then we will set up a little simulation to see what it does. So first of all, there's the count. So right now this tells us we have 404 particles. It's grayed out because I can't change it here. It's being influenced by calculations being done somewhere else. We've got the lifespan of the particles. So right now they're set to live forever. So we just go on as long as you've got frames to run, or your computer just cacks out. You can change it to constant. So now these numbers are in seconds, so this would be 30 frames. So if I play the animation now, you can see they just die off after. So they're born. So there's the creation of a particle, we call its birth, and then it will have its death depending on its lifespan and the mode that you have. There's random range, so it can have a lifespan of 1 with some variation of 0.5, so it'll vary around that amount. And this is useful even when you're doing the blood flow example today. We're going to be shooting particles down a tube, but then when they go off camera and out the end of the tube, we want them to die, so they don't just fill our scene with things that Maya has to keep thinking about. So you might want to control this using lifespan. There's another one called lifespan PB. So I just spat on the root. Lifespan PP, whenever you see PP, it means, whenever you see PP, it means per particle. Okay, that's it. It's over now. It means per particle. So that means you're going to use an expression or a ramp or something that controls the values of individual particles. So it's on a per particle basis. Particle size, you can guess what that means. It means particle size. So I can change this and move bigger. And now you can see that their collision boundaries are also bigger. So their collision boundary is based on the size of the particle. But you can control that separately too. And if we just go down to the next one down, we've got collisions here. So we've got collide strength, how they're going to collide with each other. So you can have them collide with each other by having self-collide turned on. And you can have them collide with other things in the world if they're collision objects. We'll talk about that in a bit, if collide is turned on. So they can self-collide without colliding, and they can collide without self-colliding. There's collide strength, collide layer, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry too much. There's collide width scale. So right now it's a scale, so it's a multiplier. It's set to 1. So whatever their radius is, that's their collision radius. If I want to see what their collision radius is, I can look down here. It says solver display. It says off right now, and I can turn on collision thickness, and it will show me a yellow envelope around the particles about what their collision thickness is. Right now it's 1 to 1. If I change it to 2, it will double the radius. So even if we turn it off so we can't see it, we'll see them acting differently. See, there's more space between them now, because that collision thickness is controlling that. So that's a way to keep particles away from each other if you want to simulate some space in between them, or to control the way they interact with each other. You can also see this. My computer is not that new, but it handles this stuff pretty well. It seems like it's a pretty efficient system, so you can fill your scene with loads of particles without your system collapsing under the strain. Okay, then we get into some other things here. So under the collisions, we got things like bounce, so how it's going to interact with other collision objects. Friction, so friction in this case is how sticky it is when it slides on a tangent to something in a tangential motion. And stickiness is if it strikes something, whether it's going to come away from it or not. You guys know what stickiness is. And then we've got dynamic properties here. I'm going to stop going through all these in a second, and we'll set something up, but I just want to run through these a little bit. Partly because there are loads of options in here, but the ones I'm talking about are the ones you'll come to most often. So you can ignore the vast majority of the things going on in here most of the time. So under dynamic properties in here, you can tell it to pay attention to forces in the world, so if there are fields. But here you can also tell it to ignore gravity or wind. And this way you can have one particle system falling with gravity and another one not, because rather than turning gravity off on a global basis, you can turn it off on a one-by-one basis. So there's dynamics weight. Weight just means how much it's paying attention to something. If I turn this to 0, we still get the action happening because we have no dynamics. Oh, that's weird. It stayed at 1. So there are no forces acting on them now. They're just being pushed out of the emitter and colliding with each other. So we've got conserve here, and this is an important one to use if you want them to lose energy over time. So right now, conserve is set to 1, so there's no inertia at all. If I reduce this to anything lower than 1, even to 0.9, they'll, well, again, they're not going to act much differently now because I just have them being pushed out by their collisions. But they will tend to lose energy quickly. So even if they're being pushed by a field, once they get out of the range of the field, that energy will die off. Otherwise, they can just keep going if you take out air density too. Got drag. So this is running counter to forces that are put on it. So they'll lose energy this way too. So it's set to a very low value. Damp is like drag, but it just is an overall, it's like they're in a fluid rather than in a thinner environment. Okay, so let's create something here. So we're going to make a little growing tumor. So we can just start with the same particle system. I just made an omni-emitter. So if you have an omni-emitter, this should work. I'm going to create a new one just so I go back to my basic settings. So I deleted the emitter, but that particle still exists. So you can have an emitter create particles into the world and get rid of the emitter, and they'll still be there. So I'm just going to delete that particle. So if I go to create emitter, there's one other thing that I didn't mention. Now it's in a different place. Oh yeah, so this is in the nParticle menu. There's create options here. And there's the default particle type. Points, balls, clouds, thick cloud, and water. And so this just has to do how they're going to collide with each other and how they're shaded. The ball default particle type means they're going to self-collide and they're going to render as solid little objects. So you just want to make sure for this example that that's turned on. Although you can change it after the fact too. So I'll create emitter again. I'm going to do an omni-emitter. I'm going to name it. So I'll say this tumor growth. Okay, so this is sitting on the ground right in here. So if I just play this, I guess I'm in very close. Okay, so these particles are just growing and flying off into space. I'm just going to check my collisions. So This is back to the default, so my collision width scale is set to 1. But I want these to act a little bit differently, so I'm going to select my emitter and just move it up above the ground a little bit. And I had gravity turned off in the nucleus node, so I'm going to go back into there and turn it back on to 9.8. And so you can see that the nucleus node has changed. It's showing this downward arrow indicating that gravity is turned on. So now if I play the animation, they just go out and fall. I want them to interact with a ground plane here. So I could just turn on use plane here in the nucleus node. But I want to show you how you can create your own collision objects. So I'll turn that off. I'll just create a simple polygon plane and scale it up. I'm just going to delete history, freeze transformations. The reason you want to do that is because the collision object you want to have as little construction history on it as possible, because Maya has to look at all of the construction history when it evaluates what the particle does when it strikes it. So you want to have it as simple as you possibly can. So I'll just call this floor. And here's our next type of dynamic object. So we've got particles, we have a nucleus node, we've had an emitter. Now this is what's called a passive collider. So any type of geometry made out of polygons, you can go into Ncloth. So we've got nParticles here, and just over here we've got Ncloth, and say create passive collider. Now there are no real options here except to tell it which solver to pay attention to. So if there's more than one solver in your scene, you can choose among them, and that will indicate which dynamic objects will interact with it. And this usually isn't an issue unless you're importing stuff from other files. So let's say you build a particle system in one file, and then you got something from another file that you want to bring in. When you bring that in, it's going to bring its nucleus node in too, but it'll be a separate nucleus node. And I've seen this happen before, where students are working on projects and they can't figure out why it's not working, and I look and they've got 15 nucleus nodes, and they're all paying attention to different things. So there are ways to unify them under the same nucleus node if that happens, but for now our situation is pretty simple. So we can make collide. And we can play the animation, see what happens. Okay, so it's colliding with the surface. So now here's where you can play around with things a little bit just to see how things act differently. So I can turn bounce up to something high like 10, see what it does. So it goes crazy. So it's multiplying, it's taking the force that they're hitting the ground with and multiplying it by 10, whereas before it was set to 0.9, so it's acting more like an object where it hits something, loses some energy, but can still bounce. But we've also got drag acting on here, friction, and so on. So you can see there's some bounce when they hit at the default setting, but it loses that quickly through friction and inertia. So we can try turning up stickiness, see what that does differently. Right, so now it's acting like Rice Krispies when you're making Rice Krispie squares. They're all sticking together. So now they're sticking to each other. If we select the ground plane, now this is, I made it a passive collider, so now it's called an N-rigid. And it's got its own settings, so it's also got bounciness and friction and stickiness. It doesn't have all the other settings, but it's got those things to do with collisions because things are hitting it. So if you want something really to stick to something, you can turn up the stickiness of the particle and the stickiness of the collider to increase the chance that they'll stick to each other. There are other ways to force things to stick together using expressions which are more reliable. But if you want something to act naturally, like some of them would stick, some of them would fall off, then you want to use this kind of stuff. Okay, so let's say we want to make an animation like it's cells dividing. We're not really seeing the cells dividing, but we're just seeing a population of cells growing. but we don't want them just to roll off. So here we can try and use stickiness to do that. So they're growing like this, and so if we wanted to show a population of cells growing, we could use stickiness. Or we could use drag. Drag is another way to control something like this. So stickiness I'll set to 0, I think, is the default. So this is without stickiness. So let's see what drag does. This is with the particle selected. And drag, I can't remember if it's drag or damp, but let's just multiply it by 10, so we'll go to 0.1. Okay, let's turn that up more. Go to 1. Yeah, we're getting the same sort of action here. But they're allowed to move away from each other a little bit more. So you can see the action is a little bit different. Everybody okay so far? You making your particles do cool things? We also have mass. By default, the mass is 1. If you change the mass, of course, the collisions will be different. The way these things influence other particles will be different, too. Yeah?
What does the number represent? Is it like a weight? Like mass? Like what's the unit?
Well, it's weight without considering gravity, right? So it's just the mass. And so if two objects interact with each other, the one with more mass is going to...
It's not like kilograms or...
No. It's just a relative measure. So something with 10 mass is 10 times more massive than a 1 mass. Yeah, so the only units that are real units are units of measure and gravity. So that includes speed and measure, right? Or distance. Okay. So here's one way that I've used particles before. You can use particles to create new geometry. And this brings up a couple of things that will happen. So if we select these particles, I'm going to name them. So tumor particles. We've looked in the modify menu before for converting NURBs to polygons, maybe. There's a one down here called nParticle to polygons. So if we click on this, you'll see our particles disappear. If I hit 4, you can see the particles actually don't appear anymore. But this geometry will be created based on those particles. So if you need to have something that kind of grows in a natural way, then you can use this to do it. So let's see what's controlling this here. You can see it's intersecting with the floor. So it's not the geometry that's colliding with the floor. It's still just the particles. The particles are still there. We just can't see them. So if we go select those particles, now everything here is in the particle shape node. It's not in the transform node. Right down at the bottom here, there's object display. And right now the particles, normally they don't have this intermediate object ticked off, but if particles are used to generate something else, by default intermediate object will be turned on and their visibility will be off. So we can turn that intermediate object off, and then we can see our particles inside there again. The particle is generating this mesh because we converted them to polygons, but the control for this is still in the particle, in this thing called output mesh. And here we can control the nature of the mesh that's generated. So by default, it's going to create a triangle mesh. And triangle mesh is usually a little ugly. So the quad mesh will make these cubes. So you can see here it's not smooth at all, so you get this sort of cubic looking thing. You can make it look more cubey if you turn down some of these settings here. So we can watch the growth. So that's a little blocky for my liking. So we can do things like turn up the mesh smoothing iterations. So if we turn this up, it will actually smooth and get a better looking piece of geometry that's generated. So that's looking a little bit better. And so you can see the new particles inside are still being born at the center of the emitter. So that kind of burbling action is then pushing the other particles out of the way, and that's what's making them ooze out like that. The other thing you can do, this is just regular geometry, so if I select it, I can still hit 3 on my keyboard to smooth it like real geometry, or you can put a smooth node on it. So you'll remember that 1 on the keyboard is non-smooth display, 3 is smooth. But you can also select the geometry and go to Mesh and actually put a smooth on here. So if I change this to 2, just leave it at 2. And so that actually has a smooth node. You might get a warning though, because when you go backwards, this geometry doesn't exist yet. It doesn't have any, it has nothing. It exists in the outliner, so there is a shape node for it, but it doesn't have any form yet. So you might get a warning saying, can't apply smooth node, geometry doesn't exist. We didn't get it this time. But you can get it if you try and cache that geometry or something. So I'm just going to get rid of that smooth node for now. Actually, I'm just going to undo out of it because I don't want to delete the history on this object. So let's go back into those particles. So this is under output mesh. So we can change things like the threshold. This indicates, threshold means how close particles have to be to each other before geometry is formed. So if we increase this, less geometry will be formed because there needs to be more overlap, and there's no real overlap, or there's very little distance between them. We can bump up the blobby radius scale. This just makes the blobs made from the particles bigger. Motion streak, I don't know. Mesh triangle size indicates how big the triangles are. So if I select this and turn it up, you can see it can only use edges that are a certain length. And the more you use, the fewer faces it can create, and the less resolved the geometry will be. The smaller the triangle faces are, then the closer it can be to match the shape of the actual particles. And then we can turn up the resolution of the triangles too. Oops. So this is actually quite useful for generating geometry that acts in this sort of growing way, which is difficult to do naturally. So let's do some other things to these particles. We can apply forces to them. I'm just going to turn off my polygon view for a moment. So we can just still see the particles. So if we want to apply a force to a particle, you can select the particles and then go into fields here, so right near all the end solver stuff. Go to fields, so I'll tear this off. And there's tons of stuff here. So again, down near the bottom, we've got all the legacy stuff about rigid colliders, so you can ignore that. All the fields are up here in the top. So we've got different ones. We got air that can act like wind or a fan that can just push particles. Drag slows particles down. Gravity. Newton, something. Radial pushes particles out from a center point or attracts them into a center point. Turbulence is just chaotic movement to the particles, which is the one that gets used a lot. A uniform field acts like gravity, but there's no acceleration. It just pushes at a constant rate. Then vortex whips things around. And then we're going to look at volume axis. Well, not volume axis. We're going to look at volume curve later on for blood flow. This uses a curve to have particles follow the curve along. So it drags them along the curve. So, for example, if we select these particles and let's put a turbulence field on them. So remember, I've got drag turned up, so this turbulence field will have to be quite strong to have any effect on them. So I'm just set this to the default. So the default setting is that the fields have no shape. They're just points in space, and they have an effect in a distance around them or in a direction from them. For wind, it would be a direction from them. For turbulence, it would be a distance around them. But it's often easier to use a shape. So if we create a sphere and then say, OK, it will create a sphere where within that sphere, that field will have an effect. So you can't really see anything happening because of the drag on these objects. So let's turn off the drag for now and just see what it does. I'll put it back to its default setting, 0.01. So now you can see them moving slightly differently, but not much. So we can grab this field and turn up the magnitude. So magnitude is the strength of the field. So if I multiply by 10 and go to 50, so you can see that there's a much stronger effect now. They're being pushed off of that table that we had there. If we turn on polygons, you can still see it's still generating, well, it's trying to generate the polygons. I think it's pushed them too far apart for that to be generated. Attenuation is how it falls off over space, as is used max distance. So whenever you see anything set to -1, that means infinity. So even if use max distance is turned on, if the max distance is set to -1, that means there's no limit on it. And attenuation is how it falls off over that space. So something like turbulence, you can imagine, has a frequency, so how complex that turbulence is. So right now it's set to 1, but if I set it to 100, we'll see a different sort of action. So this frequency is probably so high now that we're not seeing the big waves of it. So we turn that down. Oh, what else did I change? Oh, max distance. Okay, so that's acting a little bit differently now. So you can see them moving around in smaller little patterns here. I change this to 100. It's acting differently again. So you can get a different sort of action. But you can see when they go outside of the field, they're no longer being exposed to its effects. Let's see if my polygons are back. Yep. So now they're back because they're close enough together to generate something. So this is more of kind of a liquidy simulation, the way they're flowing. Does anybody have some? You got to grow like a little tumor-y thing, right? Anybody else have to grow anything in there? What are you doing?
It's like weird infection ball.
Oh yeah, your infection ball. That's right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm recommending it likes that, but that's where the is right now.
Yeah, it's kind of like a tangle of fibers or something,
yeah,
right?
That was just my bad sketch. Like I wanted it to be like this juicy thing that just like I guess that
Juicy infection ball. Let me write that down. Yeah, so you can do it with particles. There are other ways that you might want to, if you wanted to have that sort of strandy kind of look. I'll talk about, I think next week, a way to generate curves with particles. So you can make sort of a tangled mess of them. And then you could even turn those into hairs and then have them sort of move around like that. So yeah, I mean, if you wanted to replicate your crappy sketch, it wasn't a crappy sketch, but if you wanted to replicate what you were showing there are ways to do it other than directly doing particles.
with the curve drag, volume curve.
Well,
Feel solid.
yeah, so if you wanted to, like if you had a whole bunch of curves together and you wanted things moving around on them, you could put those volume curve fields, a volume curve field on those, and then have particles shooting through them, so kind of orbiting around. But I think it would be actually it'd make more sense to do something. Let me just delete all this and do another one. So another way to create particles, what time is it? It's 11. Let me just do this and take a short break. So if we go to particles, I'm going to create an emitter, but instead of an omni-emitter, another one that I use actually more often would be a volume emitter. So this just takes a shape and then births particles within it randomly within the volume. So if we use a volume shape like a sphere, so 30 per second, blah, 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 away from center. So I don't want any speed. So this is different. So you, instead of having speed, you have different velocities away from the center along the axis of this volume, around the axis, so you can have it moving in different ways. So I just want this set to 0 because I want these particles just to be born in this space. Then I'll swish them around myself. So let's create this. Let's scale it up. Scale it up. So play the animation. So gravity is turned on, but you can see them just being born randomly within this space. So I don't want gravity to affect these, so I could turn it off, or I can select the particle and say ignore solver gravity. Now if I play it back, they're just born in this space, right? And now if I just let it play, it would just go on and on and on forever. But let's say that is the perfect amount of particles for what I'm trying to do. So I can look in here, I can go up to the top of the particle shape node and look at count. Okay, there's 217, so I want to limit it to that. So here I could then go down to the bottom, here, somewhere, in the particle, and there's emission attributes. So this isn't something you change in the emitter, it's something you change in the particle. And so the max count right now is -1, which means infinity. So I can say that I only want 200 particles. Okay? Then I'll rewind and I'll play again. And you'll see at some point it just stops. We've hit 200 particles. The timeline is still going, but no more are being born. But if I rewind, they all disappear because they're not born yet. We've gone back in time. So this is something you'll do all the time for this sort of thing. You'll have your particles be born, stop your animation, and then set this as the initial state. So at frame 0 or frame 1, this is how many particles you'll have. So to do that, you select your particles and go to Fields and Solvers again. And then underneath where all the fields were, you can see the solvers attributes. And there's initial state, and you can simply say set for selected. You can do for all dynamic, and if you decide to get rid of that, you can say clear initial state here, and it will go back to the default. And this is a new thing, and this used to not be there, and it was a big pain to do that. So now it's there. But so we can just say set for selected. Now if we go back to frame 1, everything is still there. We're happy. We can even get rid of the emitter now. We don't need that anymore. And we just have particles hanging around. Okay, so now we want them to move, right? We want your slimy infection ball to move, have these things moving around. So we can select these particles. Okay, let's not select the particles. Let's do it a different way. So nothing is selected, and we'll create a field. Again, I'll just do turbulence field, do sphere, blah, blah, blah. I'll turn up the magnitude now just to 50 so it's stronger. Create that, and I'll scale it up so it encompasses all of these particles. Now if I play, you can see that nothing happened. It's because a field will only be associated with a particle if that particle or that hair or that cloth is selected when you create the field. But there's a way to go back and change that afterwards. So this is another menu set that's important to know about when you're working with particles. And that's under Windows, Relationship Editors. This is called the Dynamic Relationship Editor. Okay? So any new window is always going to be under Windows here, Relationship, Dynamic Relationships. And so here you can go in and select that particle. And you can see over here it shows you what it's colliding with, what emitters it has, all fields. And you can see the turbulence field is listed underneath it, but it's not highlighted. So if I just click on it, now it's associated with it. And you can see that happen in the environment here. If I unclick it, you can see the field goes back to black. If I click on it, it goes to purple. Purple means there's a construction history. There's a relationship between two objects. So I've got the particle selected, and now the turbulence turns purple because there's a relationship between them. So now, if we play our animation, we can get them all swirling around. But you can see they exit out of the thing, and then they lose that turbulence, and they just stop. So there's a way to keep them in. We can go back. A couple ways. We can select the field itself, and when it's in this shape mode, and under volume control attributes, we can say trap inside and set that to 1. And then there's a trap radius, so this you can make it bigger or smaller than the actual thing. I don't know why it's set to 2. Maybe it's the radius of the particle. I'm not sure how that works. But now if we play, you can see them bouncing off the insides there. And so you can keep them locked within the space. So if your camera was set up to be in here, it would just look like they're always just floating around. They're interacting with each other and doing that sort of thing. So we could go in and, okay, let's try and make this that weird blobby thing. We're not going to do it with curves. We'll look at that next week. But you could do stuff like change the radius. Make them bigger. That's too close. And so now they'll act differently. Oh yeah, they're already born in there, so they're filling up too much of that space, so I'll just make them a little smaller. So they're just kind of nudging each other around. And remember, we can still do stuff like change their collision width. If we change it to 0.5, they'll overlap a bit. They can intersect a little bit. And so you could use something like this to render out, or we can turn these into that geometry and see what happens. So modify, convert, nParticle to polygons. I'm sorry, I'm always in your way. I know that. Oh, what did I do? Modify, convert. So they're a little too far away from each other, so we're not getting sort of a uniform mesh here. But we can play around with the threshold, not the threshold, the max Blobby scale, or change this stuff, max triangle size, smooth it a few times. So you could make something that is weird, maybe appropriate. So now we're not seeing as much of that motion because they're bigger, but also the Blobby radius scale is hiding some of that. I'm going to turn this up, make it go faster. 200. It's actually just playing slower down here too because it's gotten a lot more to consider. But you could imagine this could be, you could make some like Golgi body or things like that, where you've got that kind of thing too. Yeah, so this is, who said that? Oh yeah, so this is Maya never had metaballs, the function, for a long time, and it was very frustrating because even really old 3D programs always had metaball where you can get geometry to merge together. But now this is the way you can do it in Maya. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff. Any questions about anything or applications?
How would you get it so some of the particles were different colors as they emerged?
So they're different colors as they emerge. That's a good question. So let me just delete this. I'll do this, and then we can take a little break, and then we'll come back to the next example. So now the particles have disappeared. You can see that they have a different icon here. This means they're an intermediate object. So again, we can just go down in the shape node under object display, turn that off. Oh, there it goes back. So right now they're coming out blue and red, right? You can all see that. So we go under shading here, and the shading indicates what kind of particle they are. These are blobby surface, and where you see SW, that means software rendered. There are other ones like spheres that look the same, but they can be rendered with the hardware renderer, which we'll talk about later on. But if we just go down here a little bit, there's the color listed here. So there's a ramp, and so they're going to have any color between this red and blue, and right now it's randomized based on their ID. So another important thing to know when we get into writing expressions, that each particle has a number. So if we go under numeric here, it shows us, it's kind of hard to see, but like this one is number 41. So we can use those numbers to tell it to do different things. So we could say every odd number should be blue, every even number should be red. We can write an expression for that. But right now it's just using randomized ID and applying to it. So if we want to change this, we can add another color. So some of them will be green, it'll be something like that. Or you can have them change with age, so they'll start. Well, now this won't work because they're already born, right? So they don't have a birth date anymore to start this from. So if you're using age, you need something, a birth date and an end. And they're also set to live forever. So whenever you see something that says normalized, you guys probably know this, but normalizing is taking a range of values and depressing them between 0 and 1. And that's useful, sometimes. So particle ID can be used. So the first ones would be red, then it would go, like 41 would be blue, or I guess, I don't know what that one is. But it's going to go along the ramp here. The other thing to do, and let me just do this quickly and we'll take a break. I'll just show you this other scary menu set, the per particle array attributes. So this is where you write expressions to control things. So right now you can see RGB PP, red, green, blue, per particle, is attached to that internal color red. I can break that connection if I want, and I can write my own expression. Except it won't work because I don't have a creation time anymore. But if I did a runtime expression before dynamics, I could type something like RGB PP equals random 0, 255. I can't remember if it's between 0 and 1 or 255. Oh, it must be between 0 and 1, so it's gone. They're all way higher than the brightest color. So 0 and 1. So now they're just strobing, because every frame it's getting a random value between 0 and 1. And right now it's just doing black and white, because this is actually a vector. It's got red, green, and blue. And I've just put a float variable in here. So if we wanted to control each of these separately, I think we could go, so these two triangle brackets are for vectors, so I could say rand 0, 1, or 0, 1. And we'll talk more about this after writing these simple expressions. 0, 1, rand, I should copy and paste, this would be much easier. 0, 1, bracket, 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 and always ending with semicolon. And let's see if this does anything. Probably won't. Oh, it did. So now you get all the colors, but it's flashing on every frame. So if you wanted it to last more than one frame, you'd have to write some sort of time control in here. So we'd choose a color, sit there for 10 frames, choose another color, sit there for another 10 frames. Oh my God, Adam is hypnotized.
Yeah, I'm just flashing down.
Oh man, I'm flashing back. Yeah. So you can control in different ways of things like those ramps or writing expressions. We do the blood flow, we'll do some more expression writing. Anything else? Yeah.
I was actually haven't covered before. How do you link the particles together? I was watching a tutorial where you kind of like link them to that.
How you link them together?
Yeah, they kind of like Actually stick together? Or?
What tutorial was that? Do you know?
Yeah, I could.
I don't know, actually, off the top of my head, how to make it. Like, you could probably add springs between them. I'm not sure if that's in the new particle system. Let me just check. So, nParticles. You could put constraints between them, I think. Oh no, that needs an Ncloth. So there's the old way you could do it with the legacy particles. You could create springs between them, and that would link them. You can do springs here too. That's for soft bodies. I don't know actually. There's probably. Oh, I don't know. Okay, this is going to kill my computer for sure.
Oh.
So. Yeah, because I've never done this with particles. I do it with Ncloth. When you want an Ncloth to link to another object, you can put constraints between them. And if it does, then you can have either a spring, which will be a kind of springy constraint. You can weld so they stay stuck together. You can do a rubber band, which will just stretch, but there's no limitations on compression. So I guess you can do that here with these two. If I change the stiffness, this one. Okay. I don't want it's going to my computer break. Yeah, see? Scared me. I jumped right in. Yeah, so you can make different types of constraints. I've never actually done that with particles, but yeah, that could be a way if they needed to interact with each other. You can have particles emit their own fields too. So if they get close to each other, they could. If you had particles emitting a radial field, if one got close within that field's range, it could snap them together if you needed to do something like that. So there are different ways of doing it.
I'm just thinking, well, I have to do a membrane where all the spheres are stuck together. So
Okay, so if you wanted to do a membrane, why don't we take a break and I'll show you. But what you would do is, and this actually brings up a good topic. You can make what am I doing? I'm dancing.
we need to.
You can make a plane that's moving, and then you could goal lock particles to it, and they can still move around on the plane,
Okay.
but they'll move with the plane, and they can still bump into each other and stuff. Okay, we'll look at that after. Okay, so it's 11:17. So can we start again at 11:30, and we'll then stop at 12:30 for lunch? Okay, great. Thanks. I'm going to stop that recording.